Joining me for this conversation are Tracy Peart, Karlyn, and singer-songwriter Jade Inc. Three women who have very personal experiences with this phenomenon and who also have very important ideas about what we as a society need to do to tackle it. So the first question I'm going to throw out there right away is what have been your experiences with colorism? I know we've all been affected by it in different ways. Tracy P., I'm going to get you to start.
Well, I mean, I've dealt with it my entire life, but in my younger years, it was things that people just kind of like did. It wasn't necessarily things people said to me. It was just like a treatment of me kind of paying attention to how I get treated as opposed to other people. But as I got older, especially when I got into the makeup industry, people were a little bit more vocal in saying things to me. Or when I used to do extra work in movies, in my early 20s, I used to be one of those people who walk around in the background in a movie. People would say very bold things to me. So I used to get people saying things to me like, oh, your skin's so dark, so makeup doesn't show up on you. It would be an excuse for them to not do makeup on me. Or your skin's so dark, you don't need foundation. I've turned down partnerships with companies because they don't have makeup colors that fit my skin. I used to sell makeup at counters that didn't have makeup for my skin. How humiliating is that? And it still happens to this day. I get invited all the time to events for companies that want me to work with them, but they don't feel I'm important enough to have a color for me, and I've had those conversations with them, and they don't have any intentions usually of having a color for me. When I was an extra, like I mentioned in movies, I would watch almost every single set I stepped onto. I would watch everybody get their makeup done, and I would be left to last because I could see the makeup that the makeup artist would have. And then it was my turn. I'd walk over. They wouldn't even call me over. I'd walk over and they say, oh, honey, you don't need any makeup. You look great just the way you are. You look great just the way you are. You look perfect. And sometimes it was movies like where it's like a period piece. So it's like something in the 60s or 50s or something like where it's like everybody is getting like makeup from a different decade or a different like era, and I'm sitting there not getting anything. It really is isolating, it's humiliating, and it makes you feel small.
They're telling you, you don't belong. We don't even have anything to put on you. And what do you do with that information moving forward? That's an awful little tidbit of information that no one needs, that doesn't satisfy your self-esteem, your need for belonging, anything about it. It's completely exclusionary. So I'm going to go to Jade now. Jade, can you talk a little bit about how you've personally been affected by colorism?
So I've been dealing with colorism as well since a teen, but the most significant experience that I have was back in the days during a chat, like the MySpace era. I received a message from someone saying, you're pretty for a dark-skinned girl, and it was so confusing for me. I think I probably even said thank you, not really being aware of that statement. Thought it was interesting for me to share and put it in my music to share with the world.
Well, let's talk about this since you mentioned it. You actually made a song called Dark Skin. Tell me a little bit about that song.
Yeah, so Dark Skin is just about my story growing up in Toronto, and this is my experiences also with hearing the statement, you're pretty for a dark-skinned girl. And I realized since releasing that song that there's a lot of people that didn't know that that term was offensive. I think there's so many different cultures, the Asian culture, the Indian culture that deal with colorism as a whole. So I just needed to talk about it. It took me a while to release that song. I had that song probably like 4 years before I had the courage to release it.
Kar, I'm going to go to you now. They say that colorism has been described as one of the last openly accepted isms. Why do you think that is?
So a huge part of that ism, and what really hurts about it, is that it's not only other people in terms of, because of colonization and white supremacy, the whiteness as a culture, having those stereotypes put on us. I think the real damage of colorism, that ism, is that it really hurts us within our own community. Because that better than methodology or mindset that comes with colorism, it's within our cultures, it's within our communities, and it's slowly not only hurting us, but it's also creating that division within us as well.
And we get those messages everywhere, sometimes from our parents, sometimes from grandparents, aunts and uncles, at school. We get them from the media. And Tracy P., I want to talk a little bit about that. look at the Black shows that you're watching, look at the sitcoms, look at the movies that come out. Tracy P., you say you're going to see a very typical makeup of cast members every time. What do we tend to see?
Our classic shows, Cosby Show, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, a lot of these are shows where, again, the women always have to share space, share roles, and usually take a back seat to someone who is a woman who's biracial, or a woman who, if she's Black, she's a lot lighter. Whereas the males in these roles can appear like fully Black. They can be obviously Black, and they're usually not biracial. The women are usually biracial. And I think it comes back to the look of beauty. Again, being darker skinned, it is attached with lower class, less money, poor, ghetto, unattractive, kind of masculine, all those things that were never the lead, because the lead is supposed to be the woman of the man's desires.
How do we begin to unpack this ism and move in a different direction where we have full inclusion? Does anyone want to take a stab at it?
I think it's just really being aware and having these types of conversations, right? I think it's about history, and I really think it's about loving yourself, you know what I mean? And a lot of these behaviors are rooted in our own insecurities, and it's kind of really just about changing your mindset and changing how you feel about yourself.
Just like, you know, that dark skin song came out of that pain, I think we need to continue talking about it so that we can actually see the stereotypes, and we can repel against it, so that we can celebrate who we are in all our Blackness wherever we go.
Let's not downplay it, and if we're calling it out, I think we need to call it out more. And if we're calling it out, please don't say things like you're overreacting, it's just a joke, or especially with women, saying that we're bitter. You know what I mean? It's a real issue, and so when a Black woman calls it out, we tend to be, oh, you're angry, you're bitter, just get over it. That's an issue. We need to stop doing that. That's how we get over it. Listen, it's a real issue, and stop downplaying it.
Don't trivialize it. And the last thing I'll say is, I believe, like we talk about white fragility, we have to look at that same kind of fragility with lighter complexioned Black folks and South Asians. Don't get defensive when people are calling out your privilege. As a matter of fact, it's our responsibility to make space for conversations like this, or we're not going to go anywhere with it. So we all have to take responsibility for moving forward in a way that is inclusive, and you can be marginalized and still have privilege. So use that privilege. That's what we all have to do. I really appreciate the honesty. Just skimming the surface of this conversation. There's so much more we could say, so please continue to have these discussions in your homes with your families.